hyperpartisan websites track users differently from left hyperpartisan websites? We answer this using the following questions. Are users from different demographics tracked differently? Are there differences between hyperpartisan websites and the general web? Does this tracking translate to any monetary benefits? We check this using cookies count on each of the category based on their party leaning as well as their global website ranking from alexa.com. In the plot here, we show Alexa ranking on the x-axis and cookies count, which is an indicative of tracking, on y-axis. We see a continuous pattern of right in the red boxes having more number of cookies with respect to their counterpart left in the blue boxes. Interestingly, we also see that websites which are in the top ranked brackets track users more than the lower ranked websites. This can be related to the usage of cookies where users engage more. We also see in some cases extreme tracking of cookies count being as high as 750 to 1000. This indiscriminate use of cookies make users and their data available to the large third-party ecosystem. Secondly, we ask, are users from different demographics tracked differently? We answer this again by examples of Fox News, which is extreme right, and MSNBC, which is extreme left. We check the effect of tracking using our trained personas on these two popular news websites. In the plot here, we show different demographics on the x-axis with their initial letter, and y-axis we again take cookies count as a metric to indicate tracking. We see here that the least tracking is for baseline, but things become interesting when we go right. For instance, for women persona, both left as well as right increased their tracking by 33%. Another interesting case is the highest amount of tracking by right-leaning website for seniors as well as men. We cover more such patterns and findings in our paper. We also compare this hyperpartisan websites tracking ecosystem with the general web. For getting the baseline of the general web, we use a monthly snapshot of tracking by whotracksme.com. We compare the coverage of trackers such as DoubleClick, Facebook, and so forth in the general web as well as right and left leaning news. The plot in the right shows some top trackers on the y-axis and the percentage of websites they were found on the x-axis. As an example, we see that DoubleClick is present in around half of the left and right hyperpartisan websites, whereas on the general web, it covers only a quarter of those. We also find some trackers such as Facebook, which are more represented in right, and very less contribution from Twitter for both hyperpartisan and the general web. As we see from the previous example of a third party having more representation in either left or right, we use machine learning to extract such patterns. For this, we use an unsupervised method of clustering known as NMF. NMF stands for non-negative matrix factorization, a technique that decomposes a matrix into two factors using a clustering number. In our case, we take matrix of cookies count, which has all personas in rows, and third-party domains in columns. For each cell of the matrix, it represents the number of cookies set by a third party of column for a persona in the row. In the RHS, you can see the breakdown of cookies matrix into cookies A and cookies B based on a clustering parameter K. When we model this on our data, we find three optimum clusters for cookies which are related to advertisements. The heat map here shows high value if it is red and low value if it is blue. We see for part A of the matrix that cluster number 1 is more attached to a persona which is more left leaning. For number 3, we see a persona which is more right leaning, and number 2, we see that it's in between. Similarly, in part B of the matrix, we check that third-party domains have alignment to these identified clusters. For example, we see ad supply which has more attachment to cluster number 3, that is right leaning, PubMatic attached to cluster number 2, which is neutral or which is significant in both, and we have examples such as context web, which is more towards left leaning. For details of optimum cluster and other categories of NMF, please check our paper. So far we have seen our crawling engine. We then saw how tracking differs for personas as well as top websites across parties. We now focus to understand the eventual effect such as monetization and cookie sharing. We use methods to identify these from works by Anagotis Papadopoulos and al. The first work here is on identification of cookie synchronization, and the second work is on identifying RTB, which is real-time ad bidding prices. These methods help in understanding when third party allows the database to synchronize and target same users. From our analysis, in the plot on my left, we see cookie synchronization on the y-axis and demographics on the x-axis with their initials. Each box represents a party. We see striking difference in cookie synchronization for demographics such as seniors, where right leaning is more doing cookie synchronization than the left. Similar patterns are there for women, whereas youth on median does not differ much. The plot in my right shows an impact on the ads ecosystem. The x-axis shows price in dollar for per million impressions, and y-axis is the cumulative distribution function, popularly known as CDF. We see in the median prices that websites which are right leaning has more expensive ads. We also observe large difference in prices for the fraction of our 0.75. The exact methodology and model we don't cover in this talk due to limitation of the time. With this, I would like to conclude with a recap of what we did so far. The first part, we created artificial personas of demographics such as youth, senior, men, women, and combination of those. We saw that there are differences in cookies count as a metric of tracking for youth as well as other demographics. On one hand, youth are being tracked less, whereas women are and men are tracked more. In the second step, we use these stable personas to test the effect of the demographics on hyperpartisan news websites. We stored a dataset of 40 GB having millions of HTTP requests, responses, and cookies. In the third step, we observed differences among left and right and the general web. The first subpart included the differences of hyperpartisan news websites based on their ranking and party. We saw that top ranked websites track more and right leaning websites track more in general. The second subpart, we saw the attachment of third party with their personas. We did this by a machine learning technique using NMF, non-negative matrix factorization. And in the third subpart, we covered the eventual effects such as monetization and cookie sharing using cookie synchronization and price for the real-time bidding ads. I would again like to thank my co-authors for all the support and motivation. Thanks for the audience listening this. The code, dataset and personas are publicly available via this link. We have done the heavy lifting of creating personas. These personas now can be tested on another set of websites such as e-commerce, booking platforms and so forth. I'm also pleased to inform that the work has been covered in Wired News recently, and if anyone wants to follow, they can follow us on Twitter. Thank you.